Still holding at 31. Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining the Learning Center at Channing Church for our first online offering, Disinformation, with Jon Greenberg. We are expecting about 40 people tonight. You can open up your participants window to see who's here, and you can access the chat function at the bottom of your screen to communicate with anyone. Just a little request before we start. At our in-person TLC events, we'd welcome donations to help us cover costs. There are a few program costs to cover tonight, but we hope that you'll consider making a donation to Channing Church's general fund with a memo donation, either by mail or in the mail slot next time you go over to hear the chimers. During this challenging time, your support is especially appreciated. We're grateful for Jon's generosity and expertise. We also must acknowledge the hard work of committee member Joanne Rosemont, who got this idea going and engaged our speaker. She's got connections. Joanne's daughter, Connie, was instrumental and patient in facilitating our Zoom hosting skills. Thank you all. We muted all participants, as we all discussed, in advance of Jon's talk to keep out background noise, cats meowing, PBS NewsHour, what have you. And we're co-hosting tonight, Jon Greenberg, Bob Kironsky, and myself, so that Jon can show his slides and do his talk, and Bob can facilitate questions at the end. You can unmute yourself. That's what we've got it set up that way, so that if Bob calls on you, if he says, Marcia Mallory has a question, then Marcia can unmute herself and ask her question. And you can also, go ahead.
And I'll learn about your questions if you type them into the chat function in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
Yeah, that's how we can keep them sequential. Keep all the questions coming in the chat box. And even if you don't want to, to write the whole question out, just say, I have a question, and we'll get to you in sequence.
And while the program is going on, you can individually chat with each other because there's an address box to send a chat to everyone, which will send it to me, or to send it to a specific person if you want to have a private conversation or make a comment to one person in particular. So, okay.
If there are technical glitches, hold tight. It's complicated having a virtual meeting. We'll do our best to resolve them. And now, a little about our speaker, Jon Greenberg. And you can see him to my right on my screen, but you see his name. Jon is a senior correspondent with PolitiFact, the Pulitzer Prize-winning fact-checking news service. There, he vets claims from politicians and others. Previously, Jon spent 2 decades in public radio and holds degrees from Johns Hopkins, Syracuse, and Harvard universities. Jon's talk will last about 15 minutes. And I mentioned the thing about typing your questions into chat while, when you think of them, it's a good time to do it. Program will probably last about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, depending on your questions. Who saw the presidential debate last night? Yeah. The timing for this program is perfect. I know that we'll have some lively interaction tonight. There's a lot to talk about. Okay. So without further conversation, let's turn it over to Jon Greenberg. Thank you, Jon.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Bob. And thank you to Channing Church. I'm glad to be doing this. Looking forward to a conversation. I know this is the kind of topic where many of you have a lot of information, a lot of insights, and I'm interested in hearing them. Just sort of briefly, what I want to pack into the next few minutes is just, you may have read our stuff, you may have heard about fact checkers. I want to give you sort of a tour of the factory floor so that you can get a better idea of how we do our work, what lies behind our fact checks. And then I want to sort of put our work into a broader context of the media and political ecosystem in which we operate. It isn't always the friendliest, but we have a lot of friends. And I want to give you a sense as to how we try to navigate all of that. And at the very end, I want to talk about a new initiative that has developed over the past couple of years. We used to think that simply giving people the facts was a great way to empower them. Because of the flood of disinformation, we are now increasingly, we keep on doing, what we've always done traditionally, but we've got a couple of projects under our umbrella that are geared towards media literacy, giving people the tools, giving more people the tools to do their own fact checking and sort of be responsible consumers of whatever crosses their radar screen. So let me go ahead and hopefully not muck this up too much and get into the presentation here. Let's see here. All right, that doesn't seem too bad. So yeah, no, we've been around for quite a while, and we're now with about 14 state affiliates, in addition to Kaiser Health News, who helps us a lot with our different fact checks related to healthcare. And to date, there have been over 18,000 claims that we've checked. You've probably seen our patented truthometer. I've got to say, this is the best little marketing gimmick you could ever imagine. So it is fun, but I did want to point out that there are definitions behind everything we do. So true is, fairly clear. That statement's accurate. There's nothing particularly important that's missing. Mostly true is not an uncommon rating. Just pay attention, it's accurate, but it does need something to clarify. Half true is the most common rating that we give to claims. You could say that there is a core to the claim that is accurate, but in our judgment, based on all of the data, that there's some important stuff that needs to be brought to bear. Still, even bringing in that new information, you're going to, at the end of the day, we think most people would agree the core statement is accurate. And then there's mostly false, which is very similar, except that which is left out is pretty gosh darn important. And we generally have the sense that, based on weighing all of the evidence, that if you actually knew that, you might question the thrust of what someone had said. False is also pretty clear. What they said is wrong. And then the ever popular, of course, pants on fire. And this we reserve for a broad category of claims where not only is it wrong, but the person may have had ample opportunity to know that it was wrong. It may sound absolutely ridiculous. Now that we've had over a decade of fact-checking in this country, there have been many opportunities for people to learn that a particular claim is inaccurate. If it goes beyond the pale, we throw that out there. Now, I'm going to get back to those definitions in just a moment, but I want to say that we've got some particular approaches which are shared by some journalism organizations and not by all of them. All journalists hopefully go back to primary sources. We're very big on that. So we go back to the original reports that underlie a particular claim. We go back to the original data. We work with the data ourselves. There are no unnamed sources at PolitiFact. That is a distinguishing characteristic. An enormous amount of journalism and news that you read today, if you like the Boston Globe, if you like the Washington Post, New York Times, whatever, you're going to often see quotes from people who chose to remain anonymous. They may have a particularly good reason for doing it. We, in the interest of transparency, will not use any unnamed source. And this last element is probably most peculiar. I would say that we are non-adversarial. Now, you may think that when we call up the office of a senator or of a president, and we say, look, we're checking this claim. You may see that as a confrontation, and there are elements of friction there, of course. But we have an approach where every time we're working on a claim and we boil it down to a very precise statement of fact, our first step is to go to the person who made the claim or their staffers. And we say, send us your background information. And as we go through the process, and this is totally true for me, if I find evidence that says the rating on this claim is going south, I get back in touch with them. It's usually over email. And I say, look, here's what I'm finding. And I'll put it out there. What can you say? Have you got anything else? Are we missing something? And in that interaction, I won't always say that people get what they want, but they do have a sense that they have been fairly treated. And I did a fact check not too long ago involving this, I believe, would be the Senate race in Alabama. And at the end of the day, both the Democratic Senate candidate staff and the Republican Senate candidate staff thanked me for having been treated fairly. And in that way, we try to make this an honest exchange of information before we come up with a rating. Which takes us to, how do we get to our ratings? Going back to the definitions, we have something that we call the star chamber. Now, this makes it look very exotic, but it's not. It's actually just 3 editors. By the way, as a writer of a fact check, I don't get a vote on the rating. But when we go into this chamber, there's an editor who worked on the story and 2 editors who did not. And one of the first questions we ask is, how have we rated claims that were similar to this in the past? We call it our jurisprudence. We're aiming to have consistency so that if we can say to ourselves, well, we're rating this differently, we need to be very clear as to why we're rating it differently. And if not, then we will go with what we rated before. We're kind of like the Supreme Court that way, but not as fancy or as lifelong. So we rely on our definitions to lead us to our rating, and we look at what we've done in the past. Now, our Truthometer allows us to put together scorecards. And here you can see Donald Trump's. Now, this will go back to at least 2011, but it's really obviously going to be jam-packed with what he has done recently. If you take a look at sort of the danger zone, which is pants on fire and false and mostly false, about roughly 70%, high 60s of his claims are on the red side of the meter. This is very, very unusual because, as we know, President Trump does not take facts seriously. But we call them as they are. We do our research. This is the result. Now, Joe Biden, whom we've been checking much, much longer, has, about, say, 38%, 40% on the red side of the meter. He is generally what I'd say is the typical politician runs from about, say 25% to 40% on the red side of the meter. So he's a bit at the higher end. But if you dig in, you'll find that a number of his claims are gaffes and not necessarily particularly substantive, but they drew attention, and we found it necessary to go ahead and fact check and let the public know. You will find in our work that we do have a bias. And our bias is that we aim to identify misinformation. And if you think about it, it's more important that we identify and call out misinformation than to confirm accurate information. Because if you let an accurate statement go by, there's no real harm done. But if you let misinformation go by, that's when harm happens. And so I view us as sort of like those people who go around through your local park, and they have the sticks with the point at the end, and they pick up the trash that they find in the park. We're kind of the trash pickers. We want to create a cleaner information commons. We do it by saying, that's a piece of trash up there, please, we should get rid of it. So now let me turn towards the debate and give you a sense of how we work in practice. For the debate, we really did marshal an enormous amount of our sources. Our staff is now actually daytime and whatever, contract work. We now have about 15 people working at PolitiFact. We're normally closer to 10. For the debate, there were 10 of us from the core team working and 5 or more people from our affiliates who were working. And obviously, any of you who saw knew that we were working overtime. It was a crazy, wild event. None of us have seen a debate like this before, and I invite your questions about it. I just wanted to pick out a couple of examples of what we had in mind. One of the goals that is constantly out there for fact-checking is to get truth out there in real time. We attempted to do that through Twitter during the debate. And there was tweet after tweet after tweet giving context, referring back to past checks that we were done, so that someone watching the debate might have their laptop open and be able to see within a minute or maybe 2 minutes, whatever, see something that related to what they had just heard. This is something that we continually strive to improve. And we offered quick thumbnails on notable claims. So let me just pick a couple of significant examples. When Trump said we guaranteed pre-existing conditions, meaning the protections under the Affordable Care Act, we take a very strong line on this. And we rate this kind of claim from whoever makes it, who says that something other than the ACA is guaranteeing protection for pre-existing conditions, unless they really spell out what they have, we are generally pretty skeptical, because the ironclad guarantees within the Affordable Care Act are very tough to match. And no Republican proposals to date has matched them. They have loopholes. And when Trump was talking about his guarantee, that came back to him signing an executive order. But an executive order has absolutely no teeth, and we have dug into that before. So we put that out there for the audience to see. And if you saw the rundown in the link that Susan sent out, that was the lead item. Biden, he said that when he was in the White House, violent crime went down 15%, and it has gone up on Trump's watch. In fact, well, you could say this is sort of half true. It did go down 15% during his time in the White House. But in terms of violent crime, it has actually gone down every year under Trump. And we draw from the FBI statistics. We are always going back to the numbers, as I said in the beginning. And it's the numbers that guide what we do. Now, we like to say, let the numbers do the talking. So we point that out. Now, I've given you one example from Trump and one example from Biden. That doesn't mean that we're pretending that there's any kind of equivalency. Going back to those report cards that I showed you, you can see that Trump is far more cavalier with any kind of statement, whether or not it hews to the facts. So in our quick little rap story, there were about 18 statements from Trump that we called out. and there were about 6 statements from Biden. So we're not getting caught up in the false equivalency going, if there's one here, there's got to be one there. Trump is in a league by himself, and that's simply the nature of how he communicates. The next day, which this is my reality today, we looked at other things that needed a little more time. And Trump had said that 308,000 military people died waiting for care on Biden's watch. Now, when we heard this, we didn't actually believe it, but we didn't know where it was coming from. As it turns out, Team Trump pointed to a report that had been done in 2015 by the VA's Office of Inspector General. And they looked at this sort of question. So we go and we read the report. I went and I read the report. And what you found there was something that was quite at odds with this, because fundamentally, this 308,000 was a vapor number. The data that existed at the VA included all kinds of bad and just cheesy data. It included people, this is the data snapshot in 2014, people who'd been dead since 1998. It had people in there who had never applied for VA benefits. And 84% of the people who were found to be dead had died before 2010. So in no way did this report back up what Trump had said. Our job is to go take a look at the report, relay the report's contents to people, and put it into a fact check that they can read inside of maybe 5 minutes or less. So let me talk about what we're up against. This was a post on Facebook. We live in a time when mainstream media is not just mistrusted, it is mistrusted, but to a large extent it is hated. And President Trump obviously is a major cheerleader of that with his constant references to fake news. But regardless of how this is being ginned up, it's something that we have to understand and navigate. And I want to get into a little bit about some of the findings I've come across over the years. We know that politics shapes what people see, but to me it's really striking. What you see here is the result of a survey done by Pew Research, and they were asking people who supported Biden and people who supported Trump, what are the most important issues? And you can see the enormous gaps that exist. Now, I focused on the areas where there are gaps, but these are all really important issues. On climate change, nearly 70% of people who back Biden say this is a really important issue. It's barely over 10% for people who support Trump. If you talk about COVID-19, you've got over 80% of people who back Biden saying this is a really big deal. And it's less than 40% for people who back Trump. So they're looking at a totally different landscape of what part of the world is important to them. This is a graphic that was produced, maybe a couple of years ago now, by the Berkman Center at Harvard. And it was a very clever sort of analysis. What they were doing was mapping the media ecosystem. And the different colors, red, green, and blue, if you will, those colors were actually dictated by a huge number of Twitter users. And the nature, the political bent of the Twitter users was defined by themselves. If they tended to retweet material about Trump or from the Trump campaign, that marked them as kind of being a red tweeter. And if they did the same thing but for Hillary Clinton, then they were on the blue side. And if they did a little of this and a little of that, then they ended up as a green tweeter, if you get my meaning. So the people's tweeting behavior defined them. And then they looked at these clusters of the news organizations that they were most interested in. Then that was defined also by their tweeting behavior. So you see, as you might expect, a cluster on the right wing, Fox News and Breitbart being large, Daily Mail in their daily caller. But then you had something different on the other side. You had a center-left type of constellation. Center, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Reuters. A little bit more towards the left, as defined by support for Hillary Clinton, New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post. So we're going to get back to this map in just a second, because this map actually begins to show what happens to misinformation. I'm going to pick a little example of misinformation, give you a sense of the volume. Wonderful outfit called Graphica did a study just in the month of February looking at tweets globally that had hashtags that are associated with coronavirus misinformation. So the hashtag might be coronavirus hoax, all right? Now, what they found is, well, there were over 1.3 million tweets that went out just in this period in February that contained those hashtags, all right? The blue column is essentially, I'll call them the good guys, the fair and square shooters. So international media, could be Washington Post included as well, and their tweets would include those hashtags, and there came in about over 400,000 of them. But the US right-wing tweeters by themselves came in with more, nearly more than 50% of what was coming out from the more reliable groups. Huge volume, multiple tweets. And it goes to show you how significant the flow is of misinformation just on this one topic, just in the month of February. So let's go back to this particular map. And here's what the folks at Berkman found. When there is a bit of misinformation, and just imagine, if you will, that misinformation comes from some conspiracy, InfoWars on one side, and maybe something really odd creeps in from the left-hand side. There actually was a trajectory that you could map. If there was misinformation, a conspiracy theory that came in from the left, imagine it coming in from the left side of your screen, it would drift in towards the center. And the New York Times or Bloomberg or Reuters would shoot it down and it would die. It didn't have a long life if you were looking at the natural history of a bit of misinformation, because this cluster is a left to center cluster. And it means that which comes in from the far left is consumed and digested and spit out by the news organizations within that center left cluster. But a very different pattern emerged on the right-wing side. There, a conspiracy theory would come in, but for a variety of reasons, it would not be rejected. It had a much longer lifespan. It would not be rejected by Fox News. It would not be rejected by Breitbart. So the right-hand side is a place where conspiracy theories and misinformation have greater longevity. They stay in play and are exchanged longer, because the way the news nodes on that side work is they don't zap and destroy that particular piece of misinformation. That's a big problem. Let's just talk about the role of social media. This is a snapshot of a page from perhaps about a week ago of from a service called CrowdTangle. It's owned by Facebook. And this snapshot shows these total interactions that had political mentions on that particular day. And take a look who's at the top. Breitbart, Fox News, Ben Shapiro, okay? 1, 2, and 4. And there's some numbers here that we need to pay attention to. There's many more interactions on the right side of the political spectrum through social media. Interactions might be they shared it, they liked it, they commented on it, okay? So this is revealing of something that's worth paying attention to. As a Facebook executive told Politico, right-wing populism is always more engaging on Facebook, because Facebook posts, social media in general, are stronger when they have a bigger emotional kick. And all this executive was saying is it is in the nature of the social media platforms to essentially reward emotional engagement. That's what the right-wing posts have going for them. They get shared a lot more. Now, I don't want to be apocalyptic here, because if you think about the Twitter population, only about 10% of the people in this country are actively involved on Twitter, but it's an influential 10%. So we can see that social media, going back to how people on the Republican side and people on the Democratic side see issues differently, you begin to see how social media reinforces that. You begin to see how the media landscape described just a slide before begins to capture why certain ideas take hold and why they are so tenacious once they are implanted. That's what we're dealing with at a time when people don't trust us very much. So let me give you a bit of our responses. First, we have a partnership with Facebook. And we have no illusions about what Facebook is, and I'd be happy to talk with you about these issues. But what Facebook has going with us and with many other fact checkers, not just in the United States, is that they flag posts that users have flagged or that their algorithm kicks out as being suspicious. And then we take a look at that list, and then we pick and choose and we check them. Then when we check them, that information goes back to Facebook. And here's what becomes very important. That the item that we flagged and all other items like it, particularly if they are images, get demoted in news feeds. So that Facebook has been finding that when we flag something as false, it begins to drop out by, say, 80% deterioration after about 3 days. It's simply, that's it, the decline in its circulation. This is an important thing. So we can only do about 100 a month, but there are thousands of posts demoted through the algorithm that says, oh, you demoted that. Well, it's awfully similar to that. We're putting that one on the watch list. Okay? So that helps. It's not a fabulous 100% solution, but it doesn't hurt. It's like chicken soup. We have a big push on media literacy. We have the MediaWise program. It is focused on teens. It's been around for a couple of years, and it has had enormous reach, directly training over 5,000 students. Through YouTube and TikTok, there have been 9 million people reached who've watched instructional videos about how you can use your own common sense, watch out for your emotional triggers, learn how to do quick research so that you don't reshare something or simply accept what you've seen as accurate. We also have teen fact checkers, and they have produced 400 fact checks. They do a great job, and they're just fabulous to watch on TikTok. Our latest effort is MediaWise for Seniors. This is a joint project with the AARP, and it also involves a research component out of Stanford University. So these two faces, I believe, would be familiar to you. They are sort of our lead ambassadors for this project. And I know that Susan has shared a link to an online course that we hope people will partake of. I think a lot of you are going to be very savvy, know how to do your own research, but you may want to share it. As you know, people over 60 who are on social media are particularly vulnerable to failing to understand the consequences of sharing a post. So this is a course that is intended to get to a population of people who, if we could help them be a little more skeptical at the right time, it would be advantageous. So that's what we're doing. Some people, the most typical question I get is, okay, you guys have been at this. Aren't we facing more lies than we've ever seen before? What good has it all done? And I have two responses to that. One is, we don't know, it might have been even worse if we hadn't been around. That's just a logical possibility. You may say it would be hard to tell the difference, but I will still say at least we're here. And that actually gets me to my second point. I think that it's really important that PolitiFact is out there and other fact-checking operations, because I think that we act as a meeting place of people who respect the importance of objective information, who understand what independent journalism is about. And when you see our stuff, you have a sense that you're not alone, that there's a place that you can come to that affirms those particular values. And if you ever go to our Facebook page and you see all the comments, you see that there are millions of people just like us. And so in that way, I think we help keep the flame alive. And I believe that that is an important function. So I hope I haven't gone on too long. Let me go back and let's just take your questions.
So if you'd like to type your questions into chat, or just say, I have a question.
Well, there's one question from Nancy Caswell, who asks, in your graphs, what is a pink circle? There were 1 or 2 pink circles in that red and blue circle graph, the large graph with all the bubbles on it.
Yeah, that would just simply mean that they they tend to have more of a right-wing swing, but there's a little bit of a crossover. And the size of the circle is the volume of usage that those Twitter people had given to that particular news organization's website.
Okay, one more comment. A question actually about those graphs is the horizontal axis is left and right leaning. What is the meaning of the vertical axis in there?
Probably just display. I don't, you're talking about the bubble diagrams.
Yes.
I don't think that there's any, I doubt that there's any particular significance to that, but I could dig into it.
Okay, Tom Howard has a question. Tom?
I have a question if Tom is taking a nap.
No, I'm about to about to ask the question. It seems as though the assumption is that if you call out somebody for lying, or presenting a falsehood, you are somehow applying some kind of corrective measure to their political career, or you're making a difference in some way. But what do you do with somebody like Trump, who's just lies massively all the time? I mean, how is calling him out this way a corrective? What can that do?
Right. So that goes to the whole efficacy question. First of all, I think we would agree that the worst thing you could do would be to accept it. So you must have a response. You see something wrong, I think you have a sort of a moral obligation to point it out. Now, we've generally found, just very briefly, because we have state level affiliates, we find that we are actually more effective as a corrective fact-checking is at the state level than at the national level. So we understand the limitations of what we're up against. I think that what I find interesting is that a lot of people have picked up on the idea that Trump does not stick to the literal truth. After that, it's a question of how do they feel about that particular observation. I don't know what the ultimate impact of that will be. Obviously, we know our values, we wear our values on our sleeve. We think that objective reality really does matter. But that is overall a decision that voters collectively make. And I think that it's just simply up to us to be seen as honest brokers of information. And I can share an anecdote about that if you like. I mean, we want to be seen as fair. And we want to be seen as fair even when we go against your guy. So just very briefly, I get the occasional piece of hate mail. And I did over the weekend. And a guy basically said, saw your hit piece on Trump. Hope you feel, good about yourself when freedom dies and we end up with socialism. Wish we could charge you with treason. So I wrote back to the guy because it was a Saturday, I think, and I had some time. And I said, Scott, just want to say, I care about this country and the people here as much as anybody. So spare me the treason stuff. Just because I'm a nerd and I like to dig into the facts and let them take me where I end up doesn't make me political. It doesn't make me a partisan. And then I explained a little bit about our process of how I go back and forth with people and say, hey, look, I'm seeing, hey, your rating's going south here. What can you do? And I got something that I did not expect. I got a polite reply back. where the guy says, thank you for your respectful response. You are different. I had certain expectations. Glad we had this exchange. So I think that, I mean, that's onesie stuff, right? That's not going to change the world. But I think that it's what happens when you remain engaged and you try to say, look, we're not trying to demonize anybody. We're just nerds doing our thing. The numbers do the talking. Here's how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Let's see, I think Tim Phelps has a question. Tim, where are you?
I'm right here.
Okay.
Jon, that's a terrific presentation. You're extremely fluid at this. And I think it's fair to point out also that you guys were the first or one of the first to do this. It's getting popular, but you guys were pioneers. So thank you.
Thank you. High praise.
My question is, and it's a strange one, perhaps for somebody who was a newspaper reporter for 4 decades, but have you ever considered, or in fact ever done it, fact-checking the media? And where I'm coming, let me just say one more thing. Where I'm coming from is, to me, the fundamental change in our political society is Fox News. Before, if the New York Times or my newspaper or the Washington Post wrote a story debunking something that a politician said, well, it was, as you suggested, it was apt to be gone, done with. But Fox News keeps misinformation alive.
Yeah. So the direct answer to your question is that back in 2013, we started a project, and I was one of the lead people on it, to check political pundits. So we are not checking news organizations per se, but influencers. And those influencers tend very much to be associated with particular media outlets. So indirectly, we were checking news organizations. And lo and behold, Fox News didn't look too good on its report card when we summed them all up. So that has been our strategy. We didn't want to move into the realm of calling out other journalists, but we did think it would be useful to call out pundits, because actually they tend to be reasonably influential. So that's how we have tackled it.
What do you mean by pundits? How did you define that?
Well, they are people who put themselves out there as a savant, and they've got a platform and they've got a following. They're trying to interpret the political social world for people. And we didn't want to get too fussy about the exact definition. But I think that the people who are most prominent, you understand, like, Bill O'Reilly, and to a certain extent, Jake Tapper has put himself in that role as well. And certainly, here's one of the issues with the cable format is that they need to fill a lot of content. So the easiest, cheapest way to do it is you have a panel discussion. And so you bring in a bunch of talking heads and they shoot off their mouths. So every one of them is a pundit. So it becomes a target-rich environment. And it's just up to us to keep an eye on it.
Well, I think that's terrific. And I would encourage you to do it again if it's been a few years.
Oh, no, it continues. My colleague, Bill McCarthy, is the lead man on Pundit Fact Now.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Okay, now Marcia Mallory has a question, which is actually a good one. How are the results of your fact-checking publicized?
Well, this is kind of cool. Facebook is a really important vehicle for us. Obviously we have our own website, but an enormous amount of our traction, of our traffic comes through Facebook. Now, there's something else. We get an enormous amount of traffic, probably more actually than from Facebook, just through people doing search. And here's something that very few people actually know about. Several years ago, Google said they wanted to be in the business of promoting accurate information. And that's a dicey thing because Google wants to say they're completely neutral. So what they did in collaboration with one of the creators of, the creator of PolitiFact, a guy named Bill Adair, who's now at Duke University. And this idea actually started with the Washington Post fact checker, Glenn Kessler. What they did is there were two steps to this. The technical back end is they actually came up with just sort of a framework, a database framework called a schema, so that we can drop our fact checks in a structured way into a database housed by Google. So who gets access to drop information in? Well, we have the International Fact Checkers Network, which is housed at the organization that houses us, the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, which is a nonprofit. So in order for fact-checking organizations, and they are global, to be a member, they need to subscribe to a certain code of conduct, and they need to prove all the time that they follow that code of conduct. And without that imprimatur, you can't put your fact checks into this Google schema. What's been the result? What happens is that when somebody, like say, okay, I did the 308,000 dead military folks, right? Somebody types in anything related to that. My fact check is going to feature up higher and be identified as a fact check in Google search. And to date, since that's been created, there have been 4 billion of fact checks that have been delivered up to people because they searched for something. This is a big deal. So answering the question, we try to work within the whole digital framework so that our work gets the greatest exposure possible.
Let's see, are there any more questions?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let's see.
Eleanor.
From Eleanor.
I've been trying this. I just typed it out for the 3rd time, hoping somebody would see it. So I figured I don't do Twitter, and I can't figure out chat, apparently. Marcia's question, in a way, has gazumped mine. But I do want to know if any newspapers or TV news outlets subscribe to PolitiFact.
Oh,
and
great question.
Is that in any way a good portion of your distribution?
Yeah, so it happens in a variety of ways. First of all, Telemundo, the Spanish language service, is an election year partner for us. So yeah, they grab our stuff, translate it into Spanish. They'll do video packages of it and put it also on their website, right? So that's important. We also have relations with smaller local television networks. There's one called Spectrum that I think has maybe 8 television stations around the country. Scripps is another one that we've worked with. And I think it's really helpful when the television stations, the local affiliates, pick up our stuff because they're reaching many more people. That's been a great plus for us. So it's a great question. As to newspapers, some of our affiliates are newspapers. And so they can grab our stuff and put it into their pages. We were created by the Tampa Bay Times, so they use our stuff all the time. But the Austin American Statesman does as well. In Milwaukee, is that the Post Intelligencer? I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's probably Seattle. Anyway, never mind about that. I don't have that stuff straight. But we do have newspapers involved. And also in California, PolitiFact California is anchored by a public radio station. So they are putting their stuff out, our stuff out, their stuff too. I mean, they do a fantastic job. It goes out over their airwaves, and they are also part of an affiliate network within California of local broadcasters. So we try as many ways as possible to reach people.
And what about your major source of funding? Where does that come from?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It varies. The balance varies from year to year because we have very robust web advertising revenue. We get a lot of traffic. And even though we've got nothing to do with the ads that get served up on our pages, that's a bidding war, and it brings in money for us. So typically in most years, it's actually number one. Then we have grant support. Foundations will invest in us so that we can reach additional states, do something new. Then we get paid by Facebook. So we're giving them a service, they're paying for it. That's an important source of revenue. And kind of like with public broadcasting, we've got members. So people can become members, one-shot, sustaining members. I'm a sustaining member, $15 a month goes to PolitiFact. I mean, I'd be stupid not to do it. I did it for years when I worked in public radio. I keep on doing it now. So those are sort of the four biggies that keep us going, and they've allowed us to expand.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions here. Anyone else?
Yeah, Bill. You might be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I unmuted myself. Question is probably just one off from this. Though, does PolitiFact have opinions or approach to influencers like rock groups like BTS and how they might influence elections through information or material that they put out either through their songs or their interviews?
No, we don't. We haven't we know that there are groups that have picked up our stuff and have promoted it. I wouldn't necessarily know which ones they are off the top of my head. We love it when it happens, but it's not been part of a targeted effort on our part to bring them into the fold. It's probably a very worthwhile idea, and we might get some good concert tickets out of it.
Yes. Yeah, you could share some BTS tickets; it'd be just great.
So Jim's iPad has a question.
Yes, hi. Thanks again for your presentation. Do you see the future as getting better or getting worse in terms of misinformation?
Probably the short answer is both. We've been seeing increasing traffic, more people coming. Last night, my gosh, we were almost at about 900,000 page views. coming to our site. That's not bad for one evening.
Wow.
And yet I do think we've got a real problem on our hands, and it's pretty deep and it's very powerful. Social media does feed people's emotions. Really, the first trigger we tell people to watch out for is if you read something and it gets your blood up, hold off. It might not be true because it's sort of designed to get your blood up. Mm-hmm. And the very, the back end of those social media platforms is designed to make that happen because it's a battle for screen time. They want your eyeballs for as long as possible. So that's not necessarily evil in itself, but it does have a pretty bad effect as we can see. So that's not going to go away. And I think that kind of a not totally unreasonable hope is that there can be such expanded awareness that we can kind of put the brakes on the bad stuff. And if we can put the brakes on the bad stuff enough and for long enough, we may be able to actually govern a little bit better, to improve things in people's lives, reach more people. So I mean, improve people in terms of better government policies. We think that there's a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of people who feel unempowered. And if we can, ameliorate that by striking the right tone, I know it's a little bit Glorioski, but if we can just do a little bit, we may be able to slow down the train.
Let's see, who is, another question. Are you through?
Yes.
Asking? Yes, okay. Question from Jim's iPad. I forget who that is exactly.
No, that was just Jim right now.
I just did that.
Oh, okay. I see. Jim's iPad. All right.
Maybe his iPad has a question of its own.
And Tom Howard again. Tom Howard, where are you? He's quiet.
Did you have a question, Tom? Because you need to unmute yourself. There may be, is there a question up out of Baltimore? Nod your head if there's a question out of Baltimore. All right, so maybe we should go to that.
All right.
Nancy?
Yeah, okay, the first thing I asked was something that came up in our Socrates Cafe, and that was, do we need a new epistemology for the 21st century?
Whoa. No, you know something? I don't think we need a new epistemology. I don't think we need a new way of understanding things. I think we need to apply the same old traditional approach of looking for credible, objective information. We just need to apply it in different ways and watch out for the channels that can mislead us.
Okay, great. And then the other question we have is, did you have a pie chart for last night's debate?
No, and we wouldn't do that because there's really not a whole lot of validity when you're dealing with something that's so essentially microscopic, reduced in time. We put together that list of claims, and I think that most people, these aren't big numbers we're talking about, most people will see that Trump's name shows up more often than Biden's does. And then they'll see the next day fact checks and so forth. But, we don't put together a report card for anybody if we haven't fact checked them. I think the number is 10. Maybe it's 12 or something like that. But until you have a certain number, you can't really be digesting the information because it's not enough of a track record.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, Wikipedia, I see a question. Can I Bob, can I answer the
Yeah,
question?
sure.
All right, man. Does Wikipedia play a positive role? And I would say yes. First of all, in our MediaWise program, it's really kind of funny. We go to these high schools. I've done it once. It's really amazing. You know, you say to these students, guess what? Ignore what your teachers say. When you want to get some information quickly, Wikipedia is an okay place to go. And we have this kind of way of talking about it. We call it lateral reading. So, you know, you've got your browser open, you've got the content up in front of you. Open up another tab, type in a few keywords from that, and if Wikipedia shows up, go ahead and read it. That'll be a starting point. So, yeah, we feel okay about it, certainly for helping people get on to the easy part of the on-ramp of fact-checking. Yeah, and if you're able to support Wikipedia, I would. I think they're fabulous.
Is that it? If you look down under reactions at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there is an icon that will create some applause. But I think we need to give a round of applause to Jon one way or the other. You know, thank you, Jon, so much. This has been just eye-opening and rich with details, and I know we'll all be thinking about it for a while afterwards too.
Wonderful. Well, don't forget our website. We're here. Great way to stay in touch. We've got an e-newsletter that you can subscribe to on our website. So just go to politifact.com. And any of you that have any interest or know somebody who might be interested in that media literacy program, it's part of a larger study, and we'd really appreciate your checking it out and passing it along.
Thank you, Jon.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Very
Take
good.
care.
Bye-bye.
It was great. Mhm.